Hello, and welcome to Week 6, Unit 5 of Application Development for SAP Business by Design. In this unit, we're going to look at maintenance mode. So we talked a little bit about maintenance mode in the previous unit and how it relates to patch solutions. And really, maintenance mode is what really drives what we can and cannot do in a patch solution. Basically, after we've done the initial assemble and download, how can we affect and change the solution going forward? So maintenance mode is something that's enforced by the SAP Cloud Application Studio within patch solutions. And it basically says what changes can and cannot happen. For example, you cannot change the data type of an element that's in your solution. You cannot delete the data, delete an element of an object that's in your solution. There's things like this that you can and cannot do. It basically it automatically enforces it in there, or make sure that you don't deploy any of these types of changes. You can always create new content in maintenance mode, which is a big difference. You can always generate all kinds of new content, and you're not stopped from changing existing content, just some changes are restricted. And the reason it does this is really to make sure that you don't cause any inconsistencies in tenants, and that you don't have any kind of data loss that occurs. That would be really bad if in our production tenant we've been running with our solution, we go to deploy a change and something happens to that existing data. And so maintenance mode helps us out in restricting this. Now if I open the help content here, I'm going to go to administration and lifecycle management. And I can see not only in the solution template, and patches, all the info on creating solutions, which we've gone into, and patch solutions, which we saw in the last unit. It tells me that how I can create these and how to get into them, but it also specifically mentions maintenance mode, and I can see that here within the Administration Lifecycle Management menu. And you see it talks about maintenance mode, what it is, why it is, and what are the changes that can be done around all the different content. And you see it has a big list of it, and even if you go to the other places within the help documentation, it'll mention maintenance mode items there. So for example, if I go to let's say the script files, actions, events, it'll tell me about these after modify event, what I can do with these. And if I go down at the bottom, here's maintenance mode, and it says that you can delete a script file from your solution when you're in maintenance mode. So that's one place where maintenance mode is very not restricted, is the actual scripting and logic that you have. But if I look at if I open up Developer Desktop and Business Objects and go to Business Object Quick Guide, Maintenance of Business Objects, you can see here this is about business objects and what I can and can't do. So business objects, I can add them in maintenance mode, I cannot delete them or rename them. And we've seen that. We said that earlier in week 2 that we can never rename a business object. But even nodes, you can add nodes, but you can never delete or rename them. Elements, you can add them, can't delete or rename. But actions, you can add actions, you can delete them, and you can rename those actions. So the help documentation speaks very clearly about what you can and cannot do when in maintenance mode, and what the restrictions are and what they do. Now to give you an idea of what it looks like, here is my original system. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. You see that I have 2 solutions now. If I go into version history here, I can see that I had my original solution, but also then in the last unit it created my patch solution for me. And I now have, you can see it looks like 2 of the same solution, but they're actually very different technically named. One has this little orange triangle, and if I mouse over, it says patch solution no, whereas the other one has this little band-aids crossing and patch solution yes. So I can open this up, and this is my actual patch solution that was created when I generated it in in the last unit. And so I can open this unit now, and I'll continue my development in this patch solution. And you'll see here now, when we talk about maintenance mode, really what it's doing and what it's restricting us. Now there are some things that you'll try and change, and it'll say, you can't do that, you can't activate that. So it's good to make sure you're very familiar with what maintenance mode is and does. It's a lot easier to not try and make those changes than to go back and try and undo them. But here's version 3. You can see the status is in development. The version history says that it was created. As I have more versions, it will tell me more and more info here. Let's go ahead and open up our bonus plan business object. And let's look at what some of these things are. So let's say if I wanted to change the data type of start date, for example, it's going to obviously check out the object for me. And if I put in just a different data type right now, although I have to spell the name of the data type right. Let's open up the help here. Now I can save this, and it hasn't told me yet that I have a problem. But now as I save, you can see that look at the help here a little bit more. Let's go ahead and try and activate. This is going to, it should stop me from activating this. It should not allow me to make this change. And even if it did, I would, as I go to assemble and download, I would have an error there. It's going to tell me there that it does a check and against maintenance mode and says, it looks like you've made some kind of erroneous change. But now you can see that it says, yes, you changed the data type, it's not permitted, and that there's a problem at this point in time. It actually shows me what it was before. It's expecting to see this line of code, and it doesn't see that. So that's an example of what maintenance mode does. It'll go in, it'll check the changes. This is just one example of a business object, but there are many different places here where it applies. And so, again, if I go back to this help content, looking through all of the help content and really getting a familiarity with maintenance mode, what's allowed. And one example, a question I hear a lot is, what if I have a business object and some screens I don't want to use anymore? And I want to take those away from people being able to use them. Well, for the business object, I can't delete it, as we've seen, and that exists, but I can always hide anything from the UI. I can go into the UI designer and I can restrict things and be able to work with them there. And that way users can't access the screens to generate and modify that data. And I can always modify the screens that are there. So then there's no way that people can utilize them. If I have interfaces that are available, I just want to stop using those interfaces. So there's some things that maintenance mode, let's say, won't allow you to do or take away or delete from your solution. And that's where it's upon us as administrators in the studio and developers to basically then go in and limit what users can and cannot do then. So I want to make sure that I try and prevent as many ways as I can from them being able to use that data or affect it. And then, like I said, for interfaces, for example, I might want to delete the communication arrangements and just ask that we don't create them. And obviously, if I broadcast that message correctly to the right audience within that customer's organization or within my organization, that's the best that I can do, and then I just want to keep an eye out and enforce that. And if I'm not using that data anymore and something does change, then it's not quite as critical, right? We don't worry about that data, but I just want to keep people away from it. Same with different things in the UI. You can always adjust the UI, so even if you don't want to remove the entire UI, just take out the parts that you don't want people using. Change those parts, whatever it might be. So there's everything that is about maintenance mode is in this help documentation. Now I would go ahead and make my changes in here, and let's go ahead and close the business object here. And once I'm done with my changes, I'm going to go ahead and again I'm just going to assemble and download this, and I'm going to want to deploy this to my next tenant. Now notice here it actually asked me to check in all the files, so it actually is doing the check of what's if there is anything checked out, if something couldn't be activated. In this case, it's going to check for a Bach element, but of course it's already there because I needed to have it before I deployed my solution last time. So I'm going to check this content in, and then I can assemble and download this solution file. So let's go ahead and right-click, check in all my files. So that part is done. I shouldn't have anything else inactive since I haven't made any other changes, but of course I could, if I did, I could go through, look to see if I see any red dots around here to see if something's inactive, or if I see any person icons to see if something else is checked out. I may not be the only developer developing in this solution. So I can do all those checks just to be ahead of the curve, so to speak, and then try and assemble a download. And now you can see it gives me a new solution file. Again, going to be a zip file. It shows version 3 this time, but you see it's back to the original namespace here. And this is important to see because obviously our patch solution it's a different solution. It's actually in a different namespace, but it's going to save things back into the original solution format. So this will go through. It's going to assemble and download and activate all the changes and give me my new file. And now I'll be able to go back to my other tenant to update it. So if I go back to my tenant, I'd want to make sure that I have my new solution open, which in this case I do. But if I refresh in this tenant, you can see here is my openSAP demo solution. I can go to the implementation manager. And now this tenant is a test tenant. It's not an actual productive tenant used. So you can see that the create patch solution is available here. And this is that case where I was saying in the last unit that I want to try and keep my development to one tenant specifically. I don't want to go across tenants. So I don't want to come in and create patch solutions here. I already have a tenant where I'm doing that. I'm just going to go ahead and deploy to this other tenant. Now if I go back, this is still activating for me. And then so once this is active, we can come back and be able to upload the solution and see what it looks like. Okay, my solution is now assembled and downloaded. My patch solution is at version 3 still, but you see now the status is assembled. It went through the history of everything, of what actually happened, and that it was okay. And so now I can take this new file and deploy it to my next system. So let's go back to our target tenant. And in here, I have still another button called Upload. So we used this before, but now I have my solution open, and I'm actually going to upload my new patch file this time. And say Upload. Again, it's going to give me the same prompt of the disclaimer about that I'm making changes to the system, etc. So I'm going to allow that to happen, and then we'll allow it to go ahead and upload our solution. Okay, my solution is uploaded. Again, I can go to the version history and see all the details of what's actually happened. We're going to go ahead and hit this to activate. And now this will go through the activation of my new content. Now it's nice in the as I deploy patches that it's not going to try and reactivate everything in the solution. If there's only some content that was generated in my patch, some new content or changes, it'll try and reactivate that, kind of a delta change, so to speak, or a delta activation. So it's only going to reactivate what it needs to, which is nice. It saves me some time during my deployment process of working with these different objects. Now it'll go through, and again I can track the activation history here and be able to let this reactivate and make sure that it goes through okay. And if I go back to my other solution here, my other tenant, I want to show you the last thing here. So I want to again continue, and I'm in my patch solution still, and I'm going to go ahead and say create patch here. And this is where I was saying that I don't need to go back to my original solution to create new patches. I'm just going to stick to this solution to do it, my patch solution. And this is going to create another version. It'll say this version 4 after this is done and show the status is in development, and I'll continue my development process this way. I will now continue to work in my patch solution, and then I can work and continue to deploy back to my target tenant. And this is the cycle that I will continue. I'll just keep repeating this cycle. It'll go through, and I'll have many versions as I continue my development, or I may not have to do much more. It may just stay at version 3 or 4, and that's sufficient for me. And again, so this, all the help content will explain a lot about maintenance mode. It can be, depending on the change you're making, sometimes you can be a little unsure about what it is. Just come in here and see what's possible. And so it's good that when I make my initial deployment that I have as much as I can in there, that I'm comfortable with it. But of course, changes do need to occur, bugs need to be fixed, and so we just have to keep maintenance mode in mind as we make those changes. So maintenance mode, again, it's automatically enforced after the initial assemble download, and then from there we just make our changes in our patch solution, and we continue development and deploy these patches And I can keep those patch files, all of them stored somewhere if I want, so I have some kind of history on my objects and actions and see the content of my solution. I can't open those up anywhere else, but I can at least open that zip file and look at the text files for those business objects and see what they are. And I can always create new content. And then as I do this, I just go ahead and make my changes, and I can make sure that I keep my solution consistent, that I don't have any kind of data loss when I deploy, and we can continue to provide great solutions for the needs of us or our customers. So with that, that ends our last unit. I thank you very much for joining me throughout this course. I hope you found it very informative, and I'm very excited to see what you will be developing in SAP Business by Design using the SAP Cloud Application Studio. So thank you very much. Good day.